Hi, my name's Matt. I'm from Mattman Solar, and we have just spent the last 2 weeks going over every subject with batteries from 12 volts to 24 volts to 48 volts and everything in the middle, state of charge, everything. Well, this video is going to go over 35 key questions with state of charge in great detail so that you can understand all the problems that if you're having with state of charge, you understand where they're coming from and why they exist. To then ask, why does my BMS shut off even when the battery is not empty? This is probably the leading cause or the leading question. And I took Ben's variation of it, but I probably have gotten one of these for almost every other question on the list. And the real problem here is that Ben's experiencing the fact that the BMS state of charge that it's basically claiming isn't accurate. And it's very frustrating, especially in a situation where you need that state of charge to match what's going on, and it don't. Now, I've had scenarios where I allowed the system to drain down. Now, some inverters prevent you from ever even seeing the problem. And let's talk about the 6000 XP from EG4 is one of those, where if you're running closed loop, meaning that the inverter is communicating with your battery, and your battery is telling the inverter how much power it can take, how many batteries are connected, how much space it has. It also starts around 10% saying, you're not allowed to get any less than this. We're going to switch you over to grid power and stuff like that, which is not ideal for someone like me who's off grid. I want my battery to run until it absolutely is dead, if that's the case. Now, the fact is, Ben, the batteries are empty. The state of charge is wrong. And let me explain why this is wrong. And I'm going to start off here kind of giving you a verbal description. And if I can't get it out the right way, then I'll walk over to the whiteboard and see if I can do it that way. But basically, and I'm going to run straight to the whiteboard. So I'm going to switch screens. We're going to try this out for the first time today. So hopefully this will work. So over here on the whiteboard, when we're talking about state of charge, and you have a battery, the battery itself is broken down into cells. And I'm going to just start with a very simple battery of 4 different cells. These cells are connected in series like this. And the positive side of the battery, and I'm going to change that to red, the positive side of the battery feeds out and helps you run your devices. The negative side of the battery goes through the BMS, and it has the shunt. Now, this shunt is not any different than your typical shunt. It is basically measuring the voltage or measuring the power in both volts and amps, or volts times amps equaling your watts. It is this measurement, just like it is for a Victron shunt, that allows you to determine what your state of charge is. Now, keep in mind, this is a net addition. So as power comes into this battery, this way, it is going to say plus 1,000 watts going in, and it's going to measure this on a time frame of every 100th of a second, so on and so forth. Depending upon the shunt and the quality of the shunt, this will be much more accurate. So if you're familiar with the Victron shunt, they have multiple different units here. I think they have a 300 amp unit, a 500 amp unit, and a 1,000 amp unit. I think they have a 5,000 amp unit. Maybe it's 6,000. I don't remember. Somewhere in that range. But obviously, the smaller the measurement, the more accurate and precise it can be. The larger the measurement, the less accurate and precise it can be. Now let's talk about this. So it is going to take that addition and it's going to take the subtractions and it's going to add them up and say, basically, we start with 0. How much did I add? How much did I subtract? And what is left? And if it comes up and says that I have approximately 50% of the battery in use, then it will add and subtract from that going forward. As you can see, the butterfly effect is very dramatic in a scenario like this. The butterfly effect can cause you to be off more and more and more as time goes by. And as this distortion gets bigger and bigger, the state of charge becomes more and more inaccurate. And if your calibration of that battery BMS is not precise, or the equipment that you're using for that BMS isn't high enough quality, that state of charge will be wrong. So the two leading causes to it being wrong in this scenario is going to be, one, the actual calibration of that BMS is wrong. In other words, the voltage and the amperage are what equates to how much power is going in and how much energy gets stored. And if that isn't correct, let's say that you, instead of saying you have 13.2 volts, let's say you have 13.3 volts, you are going to actually be putting in more energy into the battery than you would less energy into the battery. And so that is why this BMS most likely is miscalibrated and reporting more energy going into that battery than it normally should. So a good way to calibrate this, and some BMSs allow you, some batteries and some BMSs allow you to calibrate them, or you can go in with a voltmeter and you can determine the exact voltage, and you could use a very accurate voltmeter if you can, or use multiple voltmeters to get the appropriate value. I think I have a video out there on calibrating a JK BMS where I check the voltage first, and then you follow that by checking the amperage and calibrating it with a gauge of some kind, and you determine how much amperage is going in. You can't do it in reverse order because the amperage won't be right if the voltage isn't right. So you need both of them to be set for it to really truly be accurate. Now, my JK BMS had exactly the opposite problem when it first started. It was completely and totally whacked out in the other direction, and it would show that it had 10% left when actually it had about 40% left. After a calibration, it now shows about 5% more than it should, but that's after 2 months of running off grid and not being rebalanced. So that is why the BMS is shutting off before it is empty. This is the root of all of the BMS problems here. It comes down to this. And I'll give you a case study to understand why the BMS is so inaccurate. And this is not pertaining to any one brand of BMS. It's not pertaining to any one brand of battery. For example, the BMS, most BMSs that you install in a battery range between 40 and 80, maybe 120. If you get some really nice ones of the JK BMSs, you're talking about $180, $170, $180. If you're talking about looking at a Victron shunt, keeping in mind the BMS contains a shunt, and that shunt alone is $100. And all of the other components in that BMS are part of the same cost. How much money do you think they actually spent making that shunt accurate? In addition to, how much money do you think they spent making it precision enough to actually come up with that precise state of charge? So my suggestion in this case for Ben is to take the Victron shunt and put it in line of your system. And let me explain what I mean by that. We'll go back to the whiteboard over here. So when your battery is feeding this energy in and out, and if let's just assume that this could be a battery bank and you have multiple batteries down here, I would suggest that you take multiple batteries and you run them to a battery bus and you run your load off of this. And then on your negative bus, you run it through a shunt to a second bus and you put the shunt in right here. Now this would be like a Victron shunt that has a much more precise calculation and measurement of the power, and then your load would run off of that. This shunt, being more precise, being of higher quality, and being of a lot more accuracy, would give you a valid reading of what it is. Now let me take you to my live Home Assistant feed here. This is basically my Home Assistant, and in my Home Assistant, you can see that if you missed last week's live stream on Home Assistant and Solar Assistant, it's a very educational thing of how these work, how I've got them configured, how Solar Assistant reads my information from my inverters, how Home Assistant is then connected to it, pulls all that information and combines that with all the Victron stuff off of a Venus system also. I do plan on having some additional videos for installation and how to set them up in the future, but today I'm going to use it to show you that my Victron system here is showing 56.7% of my battery power. This is the one that I trust because, like I demonstrated on the board, it has the shunt in line of all the batteries coming in and out, and I'm not trusting the BMS inexpensive shunts that are there and the calibration, lack of calibration there. But if you look down here, you'll see my JK BMS is at 66.26, and you'll see that my state of charge for my EG4 batteries, which I do have 3 of them, and you can see all 3 of them here, are at about 58%. So you can see that that balances out to about 56.6, which is fairly accurate. The EG4 batteries are smaller, and they do give out give it up a little easier, provide a little bit more power. They discharge a little faster and they charge a little faster. Keeping in mind, this is a mixed battery open loop system where I am charging based on voltage, and so the JK BMS in this case is a 304 amp DIY battery. I had a video come out about it earlier in the week that you're welcome to look at, see what exactly its makeup is, but it's basically 16 cells of 304 amps. And then the Victron, excuse me, the EG4 batteries, there's 3 of these. These are the LifePO4 batteries. The LifePO4 batteries are 100 amp hours apiece, or 5.12 kilowatts apiece. So those are 5.12 kilowatts. This is 15.6, 15.7 kilowatts. Total about 31 kilowatts in the RV. So as you can see, the Victron's state of charge is pretty darn accurate. It is, and does have a calibration if you need to set it. Most of the time when you get a Victron BMS, or when you get a Victron, it does come fairly well calibrated. So it's not that much of an issue where you have to worry about calibrating it. But it does come with calibration if you need it. The EG4 batteries, if I take a look at this, you'll see that last night the EG4 batteries hit 0. And they were at 0 from about 2 a.m. to about 6:40 when the charging started. And you'll notice that right in this area here, this is where the grid kicked in, and the JK BMS actually got down far enough to kick in and cause the grid to actually come on when it dropped down. So this is why that in the case of the original question, And I want to go back to the original question here. So the original question is from Ben asking, why does the BMS shut off even before the battery is not empty? The fact is the battery was empty. The BMS shunt can't be trusted. It needs to be calibrated. First of all, that will make it better and may make it close to calibration. Thus, a lot of my concern with open and closed loop. As this becomes more accurate, open and closed loop will also become more valuable here. Rachel in Florida says, my lithium iron phosphate battery, I'm never going to be able to say that word correctly. My lithium iron phosphate battery won't charge above 13.8 volts. Is that normal? No, it's not normal. If it is a lithium iron phosphate battery, chances are your battery charger is set to the wrong voltage. It has the wrong profile, and it depends on the actual charger what the problem would be here. If it won't charge above 13.8 and you have the correct configuration, you do have a proper charger, and you do have the voltage set to, let's say, 14.2 or 14.4 for the standard profile charging, then what it can be, and I'm going to need to run back to the board to explain this one, but what it can be is yet again another case of the BMS state of charge being inaccurate. And let me explain what I mean by that. So in your case, you have a 12-volt battery, which will have 4 cells, each one of them having a maximum charge of 3.65, bringing you up to 14.8 volts for a full total 100% charged, perfectly balanced battery. Now, keep in mind, my idea of perfectly balanced basically means that each cell can fully charge without setting off the BMS safety configurations, because you got to remember every BMS will have a ability to say the max protection power is 3.65, let's say. And that means that if any one cell, let's say this cell here is 3.5 and this one is 3.4 and this one is 3.3 and this one hits 3.66, what is going to happen is that this BMS is going to stop charging to this battery. Now, I'm guessing at approximate voltages here, but if I add these up, pardon me while I use a calculator, we end up with 13.86, that was pretty close, 13.86 volts. And that would mean that your battery would stop charging, in this case, at 13.86 volts, and your inverter would, and everything would just stop going into it. It wouldn't allow power to go back into your battery anymore until such time as your BMS was able to balance the battery, or you were able to get the battery balance. Now, if by chance you could bring this voltage down to 3.5, it would then change this to 13.70 volts, and it would start charging again, putting energy back into all 4 cells. Now, that's what a balancer would do. In the case of a active balancer, it would take voltage from this cell, being the high cell, and it would transfer it to this cell, being the low cell. And if it took that 0.16 out, it may put it over here, bringing this to 3.46. And thus, the next time it went into balancing mode, it would need to take from one of these to give to that one. And that would be the first step it would take. And the second step it would take would be to take from one of these cells and give to that cell. And that would allow it to balance. Depending upon the strength of your balancer, now that is an active balancer. So there is the difference between an active balancer, and this would be something like the JK BMS with a 2 amp active balancer, or you could also have what is in the EG4 LifePower battery. Let me try that again. The EG4 LifePO4 batteries, the 100 amp ones that we saw on the solar assistant a moment ago, it has what is called a passive, P-A-S-S-I-V-E, I think, passive charge balancer. And what the passive balancer does is it basically burns energy from the high cell through resistive loads and heat. So it would basically take this 3.6 volts that this one originally had, 3.66 volts I think it was. It would actually take this and burn it to a resistor, which would basically turn into heat and dissipate through the system, causing this to slowly drop. But unfortunately, this is not as popular anymore, as the energy here is just wasted and it's not actually transferred from one cell to another. And that is why you've started seeing on the market the difference in the active balancers and the passive balancers to attempt to get the state of charge more under control. Now, there's other limitations that come in with there's other limitations that come in when you're talking about the state of charge and how the BMS is affected by that. And especially when it comes to balancing, there are other settings of minimums and maximums and where is best to do that based on the LifePO4 batteries and how they would best be suited to take and transfer that power. But in this particular case, we're talking about a JK BMS, which has an active balancer, or the LifePO4has a passive balancer, and pretty much most batteries fall into one of three categories. They have no balancer, and they get out of balance, and there's basically nothing that can be done other than somebody manually hooking chargers up to each of the cells and fixing it. They also sell balancing devices that can be hooked up to those batteries. That is very much old school at this point. Most people don't use balancers of that nature, and I say that kind of cheek and gum. A lot of people still use it. A lot of people still do it. A lot of those batteries still exist. I don't do it because I make sure that my BMS is doing that for me. And now that the BMS has gotten to the point where they have the 1 amp, the 2 amp, the 3 amp active balancers, it is much more efficient to allow the batteries to do that, to allow the batteries and the BMS to handle it itself. It creates a new set of problems, but that's a conversation for earlier today's video if you're interested in active and passive balancing. I'm going to move on to number 3, where John asked, can I mix 100 amp and 280 amp cells in one system? And John, I think I've already answered your question, but I'm going to, just for thorough sake, make sure that I quickly cover it. I have a system with 3 100 amp hour batteries and 1 304 amp hour batteries. I do not use closed loop where they're reporting to the inverter. I let it based on power do it. There are some ups and downs, and a video I released earlier today covers a lot of those ups and downs in great detail. I'm going to quickly go over them so that I answer the question, but I'm trying not to go into too much detail of seeing how I've got something out on it already. But the fact is, yes, you can do it. There is mixed feelings in the market about whether or not you should do it or you shouldn't do it. My opinion is that every battery should be fused properly to handle its influx and outflux of power. When they are hooked up into a bank, they should be very carefully balanced, meaning I don't mean balanced as in perfectly balanced. I mean balanced at the same voltage so that when you turn them on, you prevent large quantities of power transferring from one battery to another. It would be very easy to have a bank of 10 batteries get a huge influx from a brand new battery that gets pulled and have all 10 of them pulling on it. If that 10 batteries are low voltage, say 52 volts, and the new battery you're hooking up is fully charged at 56 volts, and you flip it on, you could have 10 batteries all try to pull power from that one large battery, and it could easily cause it problems if it's not properly fused. In addition to the BMS backup systems, and I can't stress this enough, the BMS is not there for everyday type problems. The BMS is an emergency backup system to save your equipment from screw-ups. So please don't think of it as it's going to fix all my problems and I don't need to worry about it. Make sure that you're properly handling that. In order to hook those batteries into the same bank, most people suggest you just charge everything all the way to the roof and then turn them on. That works, but when in reality, it is a simple question or a simple answer to a more complicated question. And the question is, what should you do to hook those batteries up? And what you should do is get them where they're not going to be transferring power between each other when you turn them on. I see it all the time when I turn off my JK BMS to validate the torque on all the battery cells and make sure that they're all okay. And when I turn it back on, I'll see some 20 or 30 amps flow from it to the 3 EG4 batteries. That happens quite frequently, but if I had it off for any length of time, then I would make sure that I waited for the EG4 batteries to gain the charge back to where that battery is before I turned it back on. So that is my suggestion there. Absolutely, you can run 100 amps and 280 amps. There are battery manufacturers have a different opinion on this. They are going to tell you that they want you to only hook like batteries in like series to each other. And they've got a world of reasons, and most of them are valid. Most of the internal protections between running batteries and running them in series and running them in parallel is based on the fact that they can only handle so much transfer of power. In other words, if you hook up 4 12-volt batteries in series to create a 48-volt battery, then you do have that power flowing through all 4 of those batteries of all 4 of those batteries. And if the battery is not designed to handle that, it could cause problems. You also have, most of them will tell you can only have so many in parallel, and the reason for that is the same thing. They don't want to see that transfer of power from battery to battery cause the BMS or cause issues there. Thus, my reason for everything needs to be appropriately fused to keep them isolated and safe from all the other batteries, and assuming that you did turn it on in a situation where you weren't supposed to, you would like to lose a fuse, not a battery. Number 4, Sophie asked, Sophie says, do I need to rebalance my cells every few months? And the short answer and the long answer. The short answer is yes, you do need to rebalance your battery every few months. As we stated before, the BMS state of charge is most likely to a certain extent highly unreliable, and the more frequently you balance them, especially top balance them, meaning that you charge them all the way back up to the top. Most BMSs will reset the state of charge when you get to a full state, or the definition of full state. Let's look at the definition of full state. That can be, for a JK BMS, that can be set to a certain amount of voltage in the cells and no amount of power still coming in. For the Victron shunt, you can do the same thing. You can say, I want you to, if I get over 52.6 volts, 56.2 volts, and I have less than 1 amp going into the batteries, then that means that the batteries are fully saturated and they're of a sufficient voltage that they no longer are charging, then I call it 100%. There are some exceptions to this rules, and some manufacturers that publish things that kind of leave me a little puzzled. Let's talk about the EG4 LifePO4 batteries again. Their BMS, their manual suggests that you charge to 56.2 volts with a float of 54. And that is a perfectly legitimate setting for most batteries to charge to 56.2 volts and to float at 54. The only problem that I have in that is that the BMS is not set to reset the battery to a full charge at 56.2 volts. You have to bring it up to 56.6 before it registers that they're charged completely. So if you have EG4 batteries and you're running into this problem where your state of charge isn't accurate and you can't seem to get it to go to 100%, it sits at 99 or it sits at 98 or it sits at 97 all day long because the BMS thinks that it still needs 5 amp hours or 2 amp hours or whatever the case may be, and it can't give it to it because the battery won't take it because it's saturated at that voltage, then what you need to do is change your charge voltage to 56.8. And when it hits 56.6, it will reset to 100%. And then you can turn it off if you want. Now, that going back to rebalancing the cells, it is important that every month or two that you rebalance the cells for this purpose. It is also important that you do it frequently enough that battery cells, as their voltage is going in and out, they have a tendency to all batteries aren't made equally. In other words, what I mean by that is you can't make two chemical compounds in a battery cell exactly the same as all the other ones within that cell. And the bigger the battery, the more difficult this gets. Take, for example, a 12-volt battery has 4 cells in it, and you need to have all 4 of them exactly matched. Now, they do sell batteries in matched sets. Regardless of whether they're matched or not, nothing in this world is perfect, especially over the time of degradation. And as things start to break down, there's no way they could know how those batteries are going to break down. Now, they go through great efforts in today's world to make sure that those batteries are pulled from the same, manufactured on the same line, manufactured with the same batch of materials, manufactured on the same day, manufactured to make them as accurate and as complete as possible. This is a good thing, but it's still, you still have to deal with the fact that there are going to be variations within each of those cells, and you're going to need to do a balancing. Most BMSs will start balancing when the cells hit, or when the first cell hits 3.4 volts. So if you're talking about 3.4 volts in a 48 volt battery, in generic terms, you're looking at 3.4 times 16, about 54.4 volts, give or take. And that means that all of the cells are there. Most likely, you're going to need to be slightly above that in order for your first couple cells to hit, or slightly below that, actually, technically. It may start before that. So that would then start to do that balancing at that point, and that's when you need to stay in that balancing area long enough to allow that battery to, in a passive state, burn off that excess from the high voltage ones and then replace that with new power coming in to charge up all of the cells again and keep burning off on those high ones until all of the batteries are brought up to the right thing. And in passive mode, that can take a while. In the mode of active balancing, it's going to start pulling from those strong ones and adding to those weak ones, which will increase the speed of the process, but this process is still going to take a while. Keeping in mind that if you're looking at let's take my battery, the 304 amp hour JK BMS, that is 304 amp hour cells, and at 2 amps, it is going to take quite a while to pull enough voltage out of one and giving it to another to balance a base of 16 cells. And so the smaller the battery, obviously, the faster this would go, and the bigger the active balancer, the faster this would go. All of them work, but they all take time to get to that point. Question 5, Dave from Texas wants to know, why does my BMS say cell over voltage during charging. And I think this is a really good case to go back to the whiteboard and point out what we were talking about before. And you're going to start noticing a theme here with a lot of these questions, that a lot of them are cause and effect are almost identical. There's just slight variations, and this is one of those. So I'm going to walk over here to the board, and we're going to go back to this scenario here. So that over voltage was caused when this battery's cell hits 3.66. It has an alert that says anything over this amount should stop charging, because anything more than this is going to cause damage to the battery. So the BMS has said, hey, wait, I'm not going to allow charging anymore. I'm not going to allow any more power to come in from here, and it's going to shut the whole battery pack for charging down. Now, it'll still let you pull battery power out, but it won't let you put battery power in until something changes with this cell and it gets back into a recovery mode and pulls it down below the 3.65, which is the requirement that we have. Now, this is why he's seeing, and I think it was Dave from Texas, wants to know, why does my BMS say over voltage during charging? And that's why he's seeing the over voltage during charging. One cell has gotten to that limit where it is no longer safe for that battery pack to charge. And since that cell could be damaged if it allows it to continue, it's going to shut that off and it's going to stop it. And this is why balancing is very, very important, because if you leave it in that state long enough to allow for that balancing at some of these voltages, it'll actually pull that cell down and bring up the lower cell, and thus reduce the difference between all the cells and allow you to get a fuller charge and to fully use the capacity of all of your batteries. Because at this point, the lowest cell in that pack that we had over there on the demo is 3.3 volts. And that means that that whole battery is going to perform at 3.3 volts capacity, not at the 3.66 volts, because the other battery cell will shut the pack down when it gets too low, and it won't be able to use all the energy stored in all the other cells, because the one cell, just as charging stops when you get too high, discharge stops when one cell gets too low. And this is all designed from the BMS. The whole purpose of the state of charge calculation is to tell you how much energy is left in the battery. But the whole purpose behind the BMS monitoring every cell is to prevent these type of mistakes from damaging your very expensive battery. I mean, some of these batteries we know cost thousands of dollars. And the last thing you want to do is overcharge it one day because it has been running off grid for months on end and wasn't balanced properly, and now you damage it because you weren't there monitoring it. So this is where you want the battery itself to take care of this and monitor it. But you need to make sure you take the appropriate steps to put this battery into the position where it can do that balancing and know the type of balancing that it's doing and how much time it needs. And I'm not sure exactly how to say that. I'm going to call you Adam. Hopefully that is okay. Adam says, hello, is it possible to do top balancing of LifePO4 with JK BMS? And the absolute answer is yes. The JK BMS has a very good top balancing system that you can configure. I don't know that I have a video out on it yet, but I know that, oh, actually I do. The battery building video that I put out earlier this week, the DIY battery, does go into the JK BMS and how it's configured. But basically you're looking at setting the cell minimum voltage for it to start, which in my case it's 3.4 volts. And then after the 3.4 volts, you also set the maximum variation or the minimum variation that you want. So if you have a 100 milliamps difference, how big that difference needs to be. I set mine to 5 milliamps. And so anything over 5 milliamps difference, it automatically turns on the BMS. And I think I can actually show you some real live feeds from that. Let me just see if I can get this to show up right here for you. Let me switch over here to the computer. So this is my home assistant, and you can see right now my cell delta is 8 to 5 milliamps, and as you'll see this change as it's got an active, it may or may not, it does not have an active balance running. You can see the voltages are low, and let's see if I can come down here into some of these stats and give you an idea of what it is here. So this shows you all the different cell voltages, but mine is set to 3.4 volts before it goes into an active charge, an active balance mode. But it also has to be greater than 5 millivolts difference in the highest and the lowest battery. As you can see now, I've got a 5 millivolt difference, but it wouldn't be enough for the balancer to kick in, because most people have theirs set to 10 millivolts, and I have mine set to 5, simply because the cells I bought were just so well balanced that I haven't really needed to let them get that far out of whack. And so if you take the different cells here, and this will tell you which cells 1 and 2 are the difference between 3.282 and 3.288. And as you can see, now it is 6 millivolts. So now the active balancer, if we were over 3.4 volts, it would kick in. And you can see here, this charge is on, the balance switch is on, meaning that it is enabled, but it doesn't mean that it's actually running. It would only be running if it qualified for this here. Now, this is coming through the Home Assistant. If you were to take a look at this battery through the JK BMS app, and unfortunately I can't show you that because I have to be close enough to connect with it with Bluetooth. But if you were to look through it at the JK BMS, it would actually show you which cell it was pulling from and which cell it was going to, as opposed to here where it just says 3 and 7. Now you can see these are changing around as the battery is actively pulling voltage from it. And you can see here that last night cell 16 was definitely the high cell for quite a while, and then it got into where it's constantly shifting. Constantly shifting is really what you would want it to do. Mike in California says, is it okay to use car batteries in a solar setup? The problem with car batteries is the charge profile is completely different. Yes, of course, you can use them. We used them for years and years and years before the lithium iron phosphate batteries came out. They also, the lithium iron batteries, which are in your EVs, are a little bit higher dangers risk. They have a little bit more problems with runaways and stuff like that. But the lithium iron phosphate is extremely safe, and that is why we've gone to them. They extended life. Lead acid batteries, they do work. They don't suggest that you bring their state of charge under 50%. They are easier to determine their state of charge based on voltage because they don't have that flat line of voltage scenarios there. But definitely you can use them. They just have a whole variety of other problems that you need to deal with. You need to make sure you keep up with the water. You need to make sure you keep up with maintaining them, and you need to be very careful about discharging them too far, because when you discharge a lead acid battery too far, it damages it. This isn't much different than your car battery. When you leave your headlights on too many times, you damage the battery in your car, and then it doesn't work anymore, or it doesn't work as well, or it goes dead even easier and faster the second time. And by the time you do it 3 or 4 times, the battery just won't work anymore. And the same thing's true for a solar system. So you got to be very careful to shut off early, and that means above 50%. That means that if you have a 100 amp hour 12 volt solar system running on lead acid, technically you only have 50 amp hour battery because you can't use it past 50%. If you have a lithium iron phosphate at 100 hours, technically you can use all of the power that's in that battery. The only thing you got to be careful about, as we're talking about here, is the state of charge needs to be accurate, And calculating that from a lithium iron phosphate is much more difficult because you can't just use the battery voltage to really determine how much battery is left in your battery, how much energy is left in your battery. Moving on to Anna says, how can I tell if one cell is dragging down the whole battery? Very, very simple. If you have one cell that is very low, then it is dragging down the entire battery. There is no, you've heard the saying that the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. It is doubly true for batteries. The battery pack is only as strong as its weakest cell. And that means that if you do have one that's doing that, signs of that would be that it shows that it's charged before it shuts off, and you see the warning signs of it saying, hey, I'm already charged, when it won't charge all the way. You can't put enough power into it to get it to 100% charge, but you can't bring the voltage up high enough to get it to 100% charge. Those could be signs. If you've got a Bluetooth or something like that where you can get in and see the actual cells themselves, that's your best bet, is to look at the actual cells and see if you have one that's running behind. Some batteries are maintainable, where you can go in and you can replace a bad cell. You can replace it with a cell that's of equal or larger size, which will, and larger being relative in nature. I don't mean go in and take a 100 amp hour cell and replace it with a 300 amp hour cell. I'm talking about take a 100 amp hour cell that has a year of degradation in it and replace it with a new one. It will be brought down to equal the other X number of cells in that pack. So you're not going to get 100% out of that cell because now it is gone past the point of being useful at that point. But you will at least get to use the rest of the other 15 cells in the pack, or 3 cells in the pack, or however many happens to be, whether it's 12, 24, 36, or 48 volt. So how can I tell if one cell is dragging it down? Most likely, it will shut down very early. That will be the real sense of, if you're sure the state of charge is correct and you discharge it to a point and it shuts off very early, a lot of times that is because one cell is lagging behind, and sometimes it's because the BMS is inaccurate. But if you've done a recent reset of the BMS and done a state of charge reset and know that it is pretty close to correct, and it still shuts down early, that is usually the cause of a single cell that's causing that problem. Tom G asks, do I need a separate fuse for each battery? This is very much like asking this question about solar panels and do I need a fuse for every solar panel? And technically the answer is no. In my mind, batteries are different. And yes, some batteries can absorb the power between 200 amp hour batteries, and connecting them don't have that problem. I would suggest that yes, you should have a fuse for every battery, because it is extremely, extremely important in a safety matter to stop the battery from being discharged in a manner that you don't want it to be. I don't ever take this chance of doing it any other way. I always fuse it, breaker it, whatever it needs to be to make sure that it remains safe, and that if it's going to go over my anticipated or safety limits, that it's going to be fused or breaker to stop it. That way I don't have to worry about it. And in different cases and different fuses, keep in mind they're not all made equal. I did a video back a few weeks ago about the T-class fuse, which is basically a fast-acting fuse. It's designed more to prevent human harm or equipment harm than it is to just pop some of the other fuses. They'll pop, some, especially some of the breaker fuses and stuff. They'll go off like a house breaker. It goes off to stop you from burning out wire, but it may not go off fast enough to prevent human damage or equipment damage, especially sensitive damage to inverters and stuff like that. So I always suggest that batteries be either fused with something that has a response time fast enough, like a T-class fuse is my suggestion there. Nina from Washington wants to know, what happens if I don't balance my LifePO4 battery before use? In most cases, if it's a purchased battery, it will be balanced enough that as long as you top balance it, with the solar system, the inverter or whatnot, and leave it ample time to get there, it will balance itself and it'll take care of it. If you're talking about a battery that you build yourself, like a DIY battery, then that would be a completely different scenario. It could be anywhere from it shuts off early until such time that the active balancer can get in and move things around, and that could take a while depending on how big your cells are and depending on how big your balancer is. Is it an active balancer that's moving 5 amps at a time? Is it a passive balancer that's burning off a tenth of an amp at a time? So depending on those cases, it's going to depend on what would happen. Most likely, if it's a store-bought battery in today's world, nothing. You would plug it in, it would come at somewhere approximately 50% charge. You could charge it back, you could charge it up with the system. As a matter of fact, that's what I did with my LifePO4 batteries when they came in. I hooked all 4 of them up, they were all within 1% of each other. I connected all 4 of them in parallel, and I did my initial charging and balancing, initial charge and balance after that from the inverter from the all-in-one, the 6000 all-in-one with the inverter turned off, so that all the power from the solar just went straight to the batteries and got them up and charged and got them reset. So in most cases, probably nothing. If you're adding them to another bank, I'll warn you again, that you do need to make sure that the batteries are within a certain variance of the batteries that you're connecting them to, so that you don't have a large amount of power transferring from your existing bank to the new battery, or vice versa. That could cause you some serious problems. And make sure, of course, you have proper fusing and all of that, and double check your specs from the manufacturer to make sure you're not breaking any of their input output rules as far as how much amps it can take and how much it can charge and how much it can discharge. Question 11, Greg asked, why is one battery in my bank always lower than the others? And why is one battery in my bank always lower than the other? And I'm assuming he does mean battery here and not cell. The state of charge, it happens quite frequently to me also, although I do have 3 EG4 batteries, and as we spoke about earlier, they do discharge faster than my JK BMS. Even within batteries themselves of the same size, the same type, you're going to run into this, where the EG4 batteries, I have one that state of charge is consistently lower than the other 2 batteries. Now, I have determined that it's not necessarily, in my case, the case that the batteries are not as strong or they don't work as well. I have determined that it is a configuration of the shunt in there is just really badly calibrated, and it shows more usage than there actually is. In other words, this battery will show it's at 0 well before the other batteries at 0, and I mean 10 or 12% from a straight 100% burn down. But it will also recover faster, meaning it charges up faster. So I really haven't made, considering I use the state of charge out of my Victron, I haven't actually gone to any efforts to see what it would take to recalibrate the EG4 batteries. In the JK BMS, it's very easy. You go in, you measure the voltage, you set the voltage to what you've got it measured at, you measure the amperage and you set that, and everything's right as rain. Well, okay, I say that a little tongue-in-cheek. It isn't necessarily right as rain. It's a whole lot more accurate, and sometimes you have to go in and make micro adjustments, give it some time to determine if you go from being off massively to being off just a little bit. Sometimes it may take days for the little bit to show up. And that is kind of where large battery banks have this problem even more. And you think of it this way. You put 16 batteries in a bank, and you basically say that the BMS accuracy can measure anything over 16 watts or 15 watts. Well, if you've got 16 batteries and they're all giving 7 or 8 watts apiece, you could still have an output of 100 watts, and not one of the BMSs would even register that anything is going on and the battery is being consumed. If it's set like that at an idle consumption at 60 or 70 watts for days on end, you could literally drain away 10 or 20% of your battery just from idle consumption, and the BMS would have no knowledge of such. The nice thing about the independent shunt to measure the battery is that it takes the combined view on the battery bank. And if you had 16 batteries or 100 batteries and they were all just providing 1 watt, it would still register it because 16 batteries would be 16 watts, 100 batteries would be 100 watts, and it would see that going down and it would register that loss. Can it still get small enough? Sure, it can still get small enough, and you're still going to have the inaccuracy. Thus, the reason for the state of charge being wrong and the subject matter of the whole day's live stream is the state of charge can still be inaccurate because there are so many variables and so many different compounds and chemicals and electrical devices and things within the mix of all of this that it simply is no way to make it perfectly matched all the way up and down. You can get close, and I've gotten very close in some batteries, but you can't really get 100% all the time. You have to top balance or you have to bottom balance in order to make the difference up and to get some kind of reset on a regular basis to say, hey, here's the thing. The way I explained it earlier today in the video that I did on top balancing and bottom balancing is think of it as a 5-gallon water jug. And in this 5-gallon water jug, you can't see in it, you can't tell how much is in it, but you know it's 5 gallons. And you have a little spigot and you put 5 gallons of water in this jug. Now, every day you walk by and you take 4 ounces of water out and you drink it. Now, over a period of time, you would be able to go and fill your glasses up and determine what percentage of that water jug is full. This is your state of charge. But imagine that the little valve that you have over a period of 5 or 10 days starts to drip every now and then. And while you're not there, it's dripping here and it's dripping there. And it's not a lot, but over a period of time, this little butterfly starts to make a difference on that state of charge. This is the same problem that we have with shunts and battery BMSs, and the precision of the battery BMS shunts is that they are going to miss that. In addition to that, you may have that water jug sitting out in the sun and it may have some evaporation. And I equate evaporation to when you buy a battery, they warn you that they're going to ship it to you at such and such percentage. And if you don't use it and you're going to put it in storage, and you can look up in practically every lithium iron phosphate batteries manual, it says that if you're going to put it in storage, that you still need to charge it every couple of months. And the reason being is because of this evaporation. This power has a tendency to fade and to no longer be there. Now, my question becomes on this case is, if this power is fading, if I keep this battery up at 70% all the time, and I go from 70 to 100 to 70 to 100 to 70 to 100 every single day, what happens to all that battery storage that's below 70% that's supposedly stored in this battery and is there? Is it still degrading at a certain percentage in a certain thing? And the answer is yes. It's no different than the battery being in storage. It may be better because the chemical and the battery is active and it's in use, but that doesn't mean that it's not degrading to a certain extent, which means that if you don't do your top balance every now and then to make sure that water jug is 100% full and you start those calculations over again, or if you don't do if you don't have that kind of measurement to make sure that water jug, and keep in mind, every battery you have, getting back to the original question of why is one lower than the other, every battery is going to have different amount of sun pointing at it and have different amount of evaporation. Every battery has a different nozzle with different washers. One may leak more than the other. Every battery is going to have a different, when you pull on it, it may start a little sooner before it's even measurable by who's calculating how much goes into that. So this is what's important for you to understand, is that there is no exact science here. There is, let's get as close as we can and let's calibrate the best we can, but you're going to have some that are lower than others. So you may have to calibrate certain batteries to get it more accurate so that it is closer to falling in line with the other ones where it's something you can do. But the best solution that I've come up with so far is to go to a universal calculator like a Victron shunt or something, where you're calculating the whole pool of batteries and not just individual batteries. Next question is from April, and she's asking, should I charge new batteries fully before connecting them? And this goes back to the conversation that we were having before about when do you connect another battery into the bank. If that battery is a different size, can I connect it, and when can you connect it? And you can connect new batteries at any time that the voltage is the same, so that you don't see that massive shift between one battery, the new batteries, and the old batteries. Most of the time you will read people say, charge everything up to full and go with and put it into the new batteries. And I think we actually discussed this exact question once before. But this is exactly why they do it, because charging all of your batteries up to full and then turning it on is a very easy way to solve any problems you might have, especially if you're not familiar with meters, or you're inexperienced, or you're running in closed loop or something like that. You would want to just charge everything all the way up and then turn them on then, and then you won't have any of these problems whatsoever. But if all of your batteries are all sitting at exactly 52.65 volts, then you could also turn them all on then, and you wouldn't have a problem also. Nothing would transfer between the nominal difference between battery A and battery B and battery C and battery D needs to be as close to zero as possible, and that would prevent the transfer. Otherwise, if you turn on a battery that has 56 volts on it and the other battery has 52 volts, you're going to see a lot of energy come out of this 56 volt and try to charge that 52 volt. And you may, if this battery bank is bigger than that one, you may cause problems for that small battery bank, or the other way around. You may pull too much energy from the little battery going into the big batteries. So that's something to consider. But the answer is yes, you should charge them all the way to full. If you're not sure of if all the voltages are the same and if all the stated charges are the same, then absolutely you should just go ahead and charge them all up to full and then add it then. Leo from Tennessee, why is my inverter flashing low voltage even when even with charged batteries? And as we start to see the theme kind of pop out here, the question is Leo, is how do you know the batteries are charged? Or are you looking at a BMS state of charge that says, hey, you've got 15% of your batteries available? Or are you looking at a state of charge that says you have 100%, but yet you've never ran it down to down below 70%? And you don't bring it up high enough for it to balance, or you don't have a active balancer or a passive balancer, and you just have a battery cell that's just being charged every night. These are all questions that you're going to need to ask before you say it shows low voltage. If it is showing low voltage, the chances are your battery is not charged and the state of charge is wrong. And with the state of charge is wrong, the battery voltage on a lithium iron phosphate battery is very, very consistent throughout the life of the charge. And I'm going to see if I can find one here to kind of show you what I mean by this. State of LifePO4 battery voltage chart. So I'm just doing a search for a battery voltage chart. Here we go. So I will switch this over to the computer and kind of show you what I'm talking about here. So I didn't do anything but a Google search here to look at this chart here. So you can see here that the first 10% of the battery pretty much brings it down into the 3.2, 3.3 range. And the battery stays there pretty much for almost the entire discharge of the battery. So lithium iron phosphate is very difficult to, between here and here of your charge, between 10 or 15% and 85 or 90%, to determine where its state of charge is, especially here in the middle, where it may be 3.2 volts per cell for hours on end. And I probably could see this also in my home assistant if I go over and look at the batteries voltages. See if I can get to the battery voltages for my JKBMS should show it quite clearly. And let's say here, so we look at, just going to pull up one of the cells. Oh, there's a whole beautiful chart down here of it. So you can see that until this battery starts getting down into the state of charge at the end of the evening, it pretty well holds at 3.3, 3.4 all day as this battery is running. The only time it dips below this or above this is in that chart here, where it is below the bottom 10 or 15% here, or what they call the knees. The knee from here at the top is where it hooks and curves up and goes from being 3.3 volts all the way up to 3.6 volts within a few percentage points of charge. Or here at the end of the battery, where it goes from having a full, going from it being just a normal battery to practically dead. And that is why its state of charge is so difficult with lithium iron phosphate, because of this nice consistent voltage that we get in the middle ground of that 80%, where everything is nice and even. It makes for wonderfully consistent devices and running inverters and things like that. It makes them work really, really well. But unlike if I went and looked up the same chart, so if I did a search for if I do a search for lead acid battery voltage chart. I don't know if this is what I'm looking for. Nope. What is this thing doing? Oh, there we go. So you can see here that this starts off at 14.5, but the entire life of the battery, it is dragging down to where it gets to the bottom. So you can easily go in and say, well, at this point, my battery is at this state of charge, and at this point, my battery is at this state of charge. And that is why you'll see in a lot of these devices where you have these lithium drop-ins, where the state of charge is useless afterwards, because the lithium battery gets to this 3.2 range here in the middle and then just stays for 80% of the life of the battery. So you drop in a lithium iron phosphate battery into your lead acid, and the state of charge of your lead acid reports that it's sitting at 80%, 80%, 80%, 80%, 5%. And you're like, whoa, what happened? Well, that's what happened, because it's measuring the voltage. And for years and years and years, lead acid batteries were our way of life. They were the way we did things. And that's why they did it that way, because it was the easiest way to measure. There was no reason to have complicated algorithms and shunts and stuff to measure the voltage, because you had the voltage to do it. All you had to do was measure the voltage. You didn't have to measure all the ins and outs of the battery to keep up with the aggregated sum of how much is in the battery that you do with a lithium iron phosphate. Cameron's asked, can I use solar panels to balance cells passively? Absolutely. So the solar panels will go into the charge controller. The charge controller should use those panels to passively balance. We've talked about passive balancing. This is where it's just going to take the highest cell voltage that you have, and it's just going to burn off some of that voltage and heat, and then new voltage will come in to charge the lower ones, as opposed to the active, where it would take that voltage from the high one and give it to the low one. In a case of passive, as Cameron's talking about here, that definitely is the way it would work, Cameron, is new voltage would replace the voltage that you burn off in heat, as opposed to transferring it from one cell to another. So yes, you can, and that is the preferred way of doing it. That's how EG4's LifePOwer batteries work. They are passive balancers, and that is, I don't know if they have any plans with newer versions to change that to active balancers or whatnot, but I know that the version 1 LifePOwer4 EG4 batteries were definitely passive. Maya says it's dangerous to stack batteries vertically. I would agree, it is dangerous to stack batteries vertically, unless they are, the specs for each battery will tell you how they can be laid. I do have vertically batteries stacked in a rack. They're made for that. Rack mount batteries are made to be stacked vertically. But if you are just stacking them one on top of each other, I would check the manufacturer specs on that. The way the cells are laid in the cases and stuff is very important. Even the cells nowadays, I noticed the other day, some of the cells, and I don't remember who it was, where I was what video I was watching or who it was, but they were talking about the cells being dangerous to even lay on their side now, that they had to be set upright and they couldn't be put in those vertical cases. So you do need to be very careful of the battery manufacturer specs of how those batteries can be laid. Most batteries, most lithium iron phosphate batteries, don't matter if it's sitting up or they're sitting on their side. As far as stacking them on top of each other, that is a completely different question, and you would want to check with each manufacturer because the cells themselves matter, the batteries matter, and the infrastructure and the way the batteries are built are going to have a difference in this particular case. To Chris from Indiana asked, do I need a BMS if I use only lithium iron phosphate battery? And the answer is the lithium iron phosphate battery should have a BMS, and if you are building a DIY battery without a BMS, I would say no, stop, put in a BMS. The BMS is there to protect the battery and you. It protects you against massive discharges. It protects you against charging too much. It protects the individual cells. Can you do it without it? Sure, you can do it without it. You can also jump off of a building, but that's not advisable. So please, if you are building a battery, it needs a BMS for the lithium iron phosphate. You have a huge investment in these cells. The last thing you want to do is destroy one because you overcharge it from a simple mistake of not paying attention to the right voltages close enough. The BMS does that for you. It monitors each of the cells. Sorry about that. It monitors each of the cells and makes sure that you don't overcharge them or undercharge them too much and cause damage to the battery. It also monitors input and output of the battery for maximum pull, maximum push to keep you from damaging it in that way. The BMS is in my mind, a BMS is an absolute 100% yes, you need one, and no, I wouldn't even consider thinking about using a battery without one. Tasha R says, how long does a LifePod battery actually last off-grid? And this is a fantastic question because I get questions of this nature all the time. I'm not sure if I would relate this to state of charge being accurate or inaccurate, other than I would relate it to the fact that as your 5-gallon container is no longer 5-gallon containers for discharging your battery, it is important that you adjust that to match. In other words, if you are going to discharge your battery all the way down to 0 and you charge it all the way back up and it stops at 90% and only resets to 100% because it hit the high voltage, you recognize, or I hope you would recognize, that 10% of your battery is missing. And if 10% of your battery is missing and you call it 100%, then your battery will die at 10% and your state of charge will be wrong again. So actually, the life of the battery becomes the real question here. Over time, the battery is going to lose some of its capacity. You need to, in a case of a JK BMS, or in case of the EG4, the EG4 has a lifetime cycles meter that calculates what they call the state of health. The state of health means that if I'm at 95% state of health, that my 100 amp hour battery is now a 95 amp hour battery. In the JK BMS, you can go in and adjust the size of the capacity of those cells. And I would suggest that you go in once a year and you run that capacity test. You run that battery all the way down to 0 and you charge it back up. And when it truly gets to 100%, you determine what that state of charge is. If it's a 300 amp hour battery and you only get 287 amps in there, set the battery size to 287 amps so that your state of charge can be accurate. Because if that 5-gallon barrel that you're using and you're talking about, and you're every day you're pulling some power out of it, if it's not 5 gallons and you're assuming it is, and it's only got 4.5 gallons in there, consistently you say, well, when it's full, I call it 5 gallons and I start calculating from there. That's wonderful. But what happens when you get down to there's a half a gallon left and your barrel is empty? Then your state of charge says, hey, I'm at whatever percentage a half a gallon is out of a 5 gallon jug, which I think is 10%. I'm at 10%, and voila, I'm empty. And it shuts off and cancels the last 10% because it was never accurate in the first place. You reported a 5 gallon barrel and there isn't 5 gallons there. Okay, enough said on that one. How long does a LifePO4 battery actually last is the question, and I'm going to get to it, but I wanted to go over that, how it related to state of charge first. Most of the batteries that are coming out claim to have 5,000, 6,000, 10,000, 12,000 cycles. The problem with this number is that nobody has defined what cycles mean. And every manufacturer defines it differently. And most of the time you don't know until you start reading the actual manufacturer definition of cycles. In my mind, a cycle means that I pull the battery down to a certain, use a certain amount of it and charge it back up. I would probably say an 80% discharge and recharge should be 1 cycle. Some manufacturers use 100%. So they say if I've got the battery going up and down to 50% twice, then that counts as a cycle. Some manufacturers use less than that. They say 80% depth of discharge. So they say if I go from 100% to 60%, back up to 100%, back down to 60%, that's 1 cycle. I know that I have been using my batteries in my RV now for about a year, every single day. Every day I cycle them, but both of my batteries don't show that number of cycles in their statistics. And if I can pull that up, let me see if I can get to that real quick. See if it's in my statistics here, the number of cycles. And I'm probably going to have to go to a screen that just has a bunch of configuration data on it in order to show it to you. But they have, I installed them last year around this time. Let me scroll down here and see if I can find the cycles. There we are. So if I switch this over to this screen, and if I turn off the questions where you can see it, you'll see here that I got 224 cycles, 219 cycles, and 210 cycles. These 3 EG4 batteries, they can't even between themselves, all running the same system, agree on what a cycle is. So we have to assume that if these batteries are guaranteed to last for, and I don't know what the LifePO4 battery is guaranteed to last for. Let's take a look. EG4 LifePO4 spec sheet probably. Yeah, looks good. There we go, spec sheet. Okay, so they've got a 5-year warranty and they are 100 amp hours, and this is the right battery. And if I come down here to the spec sheet and look at cycles, let's see how many cycles they're saying. I don't see cycles listed here. Why not? I'm probably just missing it. Storage. And let's see, LifePO4 EG4 number of cycles. Let's see if we can get Google AI to find it for me. 7,000. Okay. So if we have 7,000 cycles on that battery, and I have in a year have used 224 on the largest battery. 7,000 divided by 224 leaves me to 31 years of life on this battery. I think it's pretty safe to say the batteries are going to outlive us. So I have abandoned all attention to what's going on with the batteries when it comes to, well, is the heat from the RV going to cause some problems? Yeah, probably. I might lose an extra 5% within the 31 years. So take off, 5% of 31 years or 10%. So instead of 31 years, I get 28 years of life out of them. But you know what? I'm going to use 0 to 100% of that battery every day I need to, just like I did last night. I'm going to use them as much as I can because I find it absolutely crazy that everyone is saying that if you protect the battery from if you protect the battery from the use, that it will last longer than it is. These batteries, these are one of the very first ones out on the thing. They've got 7,000 cycles. Batteries coming out nowadays have 10,000, 12,000, 15,000 cycles. That is twice what this one is. That means that these batteries could last for 60 years. That's crazy. Use your battery power today. And the answer to the question that was originally asked is Tish saying, how long does a LifePod battery actually last off grid? Well, that's a real life scenario. I have seen very little degradation in the batteries and I've had them for a year. I do not protect them from the heat. They live in the RV in Florida. Today, right now, if I am to pull up the temperature gauge in my RV, I'm going to come over here and scroll over to this screen here, or maybe this screen here. You're going to see that it's 73 in the bedroom, it's 75 outside, and it's 84 in the bay. And if I look at the temperature outside for the weather, it is 83 degrees. It's raining today. Typically, it's 95, 100 degrees here every day. So I don't protect them. I don't allow them to get hit by direct sun. That would be very bad because that would really escalate them into the hundreds, 110, 120, 130. But as long as you're protecting them from the direct sunlight, use your batteries. That's what they're for. Use them. Okay. How long do they last? They last a very long time, probably longer than me. And that's just an honest opinion. I have the evidence that's backing these batteries at this point is so flimsy of how long these batteries are going to last, of why these battery makers are saying 80% depth of discharge. It's so flimsy at this point. I'm not even sure that they're doing anything but just covering themselves because they don't want to live up to some warranties in case the statistics that they're actually seeing are wrong. There are no live, I have not seen any real long-term tests yet that prove anything about the life of the batteries other than they probably will lose 20% of their power over 5 years or 10 years. Okay, they're going to lose it regardless. Those were scientific tests that show if you only use it, you lose it. There's nothing that shows what happens when you abuse it. They say there's 3 things that degrade your battery. That is going to be heat, that is going to be cycles, and that is going to be excessive charging and discharging in those circumstances with cold. As long as you're not doing any of those 3, you really don't have a whole lot to worry about. Ethan in Maine wants to know, can I use a battery heater in freezing temps safely? Absolutely. Lithium, and I'm not sure if he means a battery heater. Most of the batteries that come today, especially the JK BMSs, if you're building the battery, they come with battery heaters built into them so that they can keep them warm so that you can use them in cold weather. Cold weather, lithium batteries do not like anything below freezing. Anything below 0 degrees, 32 degrees Celsius, 32, 0 Celsius or 32 degrees Fahrenheit, they don't like it. They should be cut off and should not be allowed to charge. They will discharge up to a certain extent. But most batteries these days, even the ones that are stored in your RV or something along that line, as long as you put them in an environment where you're also at or close to the environment where you're at, you're not going to run into problems with them being cold. But can you run heaters? Yes, there's all kinds of designs out there for heaters to keep them warm, for routing temperature control vents down to them. so that you can keep them warm. The important thing is that you keep them above, I would say probably in the 38 to 40 zone. And as long as you keep them in the 38 to 40 zone and above that, you're going to be fine. And so, yes, you can run heaters and safely, but the heater needs to be, and I want to be very cautious about what I say here. That doesn't mean you can stick a space heater underneath in your bay, plug it in, lay it on its side, and let it keep your battery warm. They need to be approved heating techniques that you would use to do that. Batteries have special heaters that can be used for them to keep them warm so that they can be used in the winter. And that is what I'm suggesting. I am not suggesting any other kind of crazy device that you would want to hook it up to. Will my battery explode if I overcharge it? If you've got a BMS, it shouldn't. It shouldn't basically overcharge at all. It should shut down before it gets to overcharging. If you don't have a BMS, you're on your own, and I don't know what the cells would do. I have never ran a cell to that extent. I don't think they would explode. I think they would melt down and shut off. A lithium iron phosphate, the phosphate makes the lithium very stable and prevents it from runaway burns and stuff like that. But that would definitely do it. It looks like we have YouTube. Hi there, I recently found you 1 hour south of you. Let me see if I can get that up on the screen here. Hi there, I recently found you 1 hour south of you. Could the cycle times be suspect because of Prius and Tesla needs battery replacements, or are those different? Yes, and keep in mind that EVs are not lithium iron phosphate batteries. They are lithium batteries, and there is a key difference here. So a lithium battery is made of lithium and some other materials. A lithium iron phosphate has the phosphate added to the battery, and it has a very unique effect on lithium batteries. Let me explain what I mean by that. Your cell phone, your laptops, and your EVs are all lithium batteries. They are, let's say, less stable than lithium iron phosphate. That is one of the side effects of adding phosphate to the chemical mix-up of sorry, I just got a really big distraction, and I'm going to finish answering this, and then I'm going to tell you what the distraction is. I've got some breaking news, and I wish I had a big banner I could flash up, but I'm not going to. So when you add the phosphate to lithium battery, it basically becomes more stable and prevents it from being dangerous. People mount lithium iron phosphate batteries under their bed. Lithium batteries are the ones that were causing the runaway fires on airplanes and cars to catch on fire and stuff like that. There is a huge difference between them. Now, what are the chemical effects of it? That is the good side to a lithium iron phosphate battery, is that it is much more stable and safe and very much resistant to runaways and dangerous burn downs and flame outs and that type of stuff. There are some other side effects also. The life expectancy of the battery is much extended, in that a battery that may only last for, like your cell phone, may only last for a year or two of being cycled every day, may last for 10 or 20 or 30 years, as we discussed earlier. But there are also some downsides. The consumption or charge rate is not as much. You can't charge it as fast. It doesn't absorb the power as quickly as a lithium battery, as opposed to the lithium iron phosphate limits your ability to charge it. It also limits its ability to discharge. So in essence, what you basically do by adding that is you extend the life of it, but you decrease the amount of energy that it can hold, the amount of speed at which it can take that energy in, and the amount of energy that it can discharge, the rate at which it can discharge. that in my mind makes it perfect for solar, makes it perfect for the uses in which we have it for. It does not make it perfect for an EV, because an EV's lifespan is going to be shorter because it is not going to have the effects of that lithium iron phosphate in there. Now, I say that, and I don't want to blanketly say that no EVs have lithium iron phosphate batteries. I don't know that for sure. I do know that a majority of them are lithium batteries, and lithium batteries are the same as you have in your phones, the same as you have in your thing. And as we all know, a phone battery lasts for a couple of years and then it starts to conk out. And the reason it conks out is, yes, it's a lithium battery, but it's not a lithium iron phosphate battery. But it also allows you to plug in a quick charger and go boom and zap a bunch of power into it very quickly. And it also allows for a very high voltage discharge, where that isn't necessarily true with lithium iron phosphate. I hope the YouTube, I guess that's just a handle. I hope that that answers your question. If not, please let me know and we'll revisit it again. And now for some breaking news, and I want to set off a little bit of confetti and some fireworks here. We have finally, I said last week I didn't think we would make 7,000 subscribers. Well, we did it during the show this week because I thought there was no hope of actually doing it this week. So that means that this is the 7th consecutive live stream that we have celebrated an additional 1,000 subscribers. And I want to say thank you to all of my subscribers and for all of you for watching and for asking your questions and for sending your emails. And I am enjoying myself enormously. I hope you are getting something from this also. And I cannot say thank you enough. And thank you, Leonard, for your comment. I really appreciate it. It has been a fun ride, and I would not do it any other way, or couldn't have just never dreamed this would happen when it started. So thank you. And so I'm going to one more time for the confetti and everything, and finish the celebration. Then we're going to get back to the live stream and answer the questions. So thank you, everybody. I really do appreciate it. It has been a fun ride, and I have no way will we hit 8,000 by next week, but I hope I'm wrong again. Is Brian O from Oklahoma, and Brian O is basically asking, what size fuse should I use for a 200 amp batteries? Well, isn't this appropriate? It's a very good question, and fuses are very, very important to the safety of your systems. And there's a very easy rule of thumb here to handle. The first rule of thumb that I have is you want to always do a couple of different measurement sizes here and then pick the lowest common denominator, not the highest. And what I mean by that, you have a 200 amp hour battery that you're asking about here, Brian, and you're asking what size fuse. And so the short answer is 200 amps battery is most likely the high pull from this. If it's a 100 amp hour battery like it was with, and I'm going to go back to the previous question and kind of show this, and I'm going to have to turn this one off. So in this case, you have a 300 amp hour battery, but he also specified that it had a 200 amp BMS. And so not always in the case do these match one for one. Usually if you have a 100 amp hour battery, you also have a 100 amp BMS. In this case, you had Brian from Oklahoma has a 200 amp hour battery. Most likely you have a 100 amp BMS, whereas in the case of YouTube here, he has a 300 amp hour battery with a 200 amp BMS. So the BMS size is what's important here. So we want to do two calculations. The first one I would say is what size amps does your BMS support? And in this case, it's a 200 amp hour battery. And if I look at the other question here, it is a 200 amp hour battery, most likely with a 100 amp hour BMS. So I'm going to tell you both answers, and then we're going to move on to the second part of this, because the BMS is only one piece of it. So I would say that on a 200 amp hour battery with a 200 amp BMS, or any BMS that's 200 amp BMS, that you want to allow for a 20% variance. In other words, you want the fuse to pop when it goes 20% over the maximum pull. This will allow for spikes of turning on and quick surges and stuff like that. So 200 amps and a 20% variance would be a 240 amp fuse. They probably don't make a lot of 240 amp fuses, so you go with a 250 amp fuse is where I would go, which is exactly what I have in my RV. I had 100 amp batteries. I assumed that two of them would one could go off, leaving me with 200 amp maximum pull. So I put in a 250 amp battery. If you have a 100 amp BMS and you only have one, then you will want to do 20% of that being a 120 amp fuse. And that would prevent it from overcharge there. Now, the second part of the equation here is usually the most important part, and that is fuses and breakers most of the time are there to protect the wiring from melting or causing problems. And that means that if you have a, let's say, 8-AUG wire or 8-gauge wire, and you don't have larger wire, then you're going to want to build the fuse to protect the wire and the circuits around that wire. So we can easily go out to something like a ChatGPT and we could ask it, what size wire, what size, what is an amp? Let's do it that way. What is an amperage chart for wire gauges? See if that gets it correct. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to pull this up for you in, yep, I'm just going to switch the screens here, turn this off and switch this over. So you can see here that as we go down this chart and we get to an 8-gauge, this is maximum amps at the different temperature of the different wires that you buy. So if you've got a 60 degree wire, and you've got an 8-gauge wire, you only can pull 40 amps through it. And so my suggestion is you make the fuse protect that wire. Otherwise, it'll pull that amperage and your wire shielding will just melt off. And that's where the real problem comes in. And this is where one of the most common mistakes is people don't take into account. Yes, the BMS can support 100 amps or 200 amps, but can the wire of the system, can the bus bars of the system, and you want to go through all of your equipment and make sure that the weakest link is where you put that, is what you're putting that fuse on, because that's where you're going to run into the biggest problem. So in order to support a 200 amp fuse, if you have wire that's only 60 degrees, which basically means most THHN wire, you're going to have to go in the excess of 4i. Now, if you decide to go with a little nicer wire, so what if I used 105 degree marine grade wire? Then it will give me a whole new chart and a whole new specification that I can protect with. So I have got one wire in my RV, and it can support about 250, 245 amps. Therefore, a 200 amp system with a 250 amp fuse would be perfectly safe. Now, I cannot stress this enough, that this is very, very dangerous if you get this wrong and you're putting in these giant BMSs and you're fusing it based on the BMSs. Now, if the wire can support 200 amps and your BMS is only 100 amps and you want to protect the BMS from it, then you could put in a smaller fuse and protect the BMS. That would also protect the wire. But make sure that you don't have components that are going to burn and melt down if you don't put the right fuse in there. So we go back to the original question, if I can find it. And the original question was, what size fuse do I use for a 200 amp hour battery? Well, if the 200 amp hour battery also has a 200 amp BMS and the wire can support it, then you would put in a 250 amp fuse. If the BMS is a 100 amp BMS, then it needs to be a 120 amp fuse, and you need to make sure that the wire can support 120 amps, or you downgrade to what the wire can support. And that's my answer there, but I wanted to be very careful not to just give you an uncautious answer that basically doesn't really tell you the real solution that you're looking for. Alex asked, why don't my BMS reconnect after shutdown? Why don't my BMS reconnect after a shutdown? And I'm assuming that Alex is referring to the battery discharged all the way and then it shut down, and now he's expecting it to reconnect, and I'm not 100% sure. I'm going to run on that assumption that it does. There are some inverters that will recover and automatically go into, when the solar panels start to produce, they go into charging mode. There are some charge controllers like Victron that will also do that, the power can come from both the battery side or the solar side, and when the solar panels come up the next morning, they start to generate power, which turns on the charge controller, which then in turn can trickle charge enough power into the battery to enable it. It can also be a side effect of the battery itself that's shut down and is not allowing you to charge. So there are a lot of different things here. Most likely your configuration for your inverter, if it's an all-in-one, or for your charge controller, is configured wrong to not automatically recover, and that would be why it's done that. And that would be what I normally see, is that it's not getting that trickle charge, which re-enables the BMS and turns it back on after it's shut down, discharging. Most BMSs these days, and you'll see from the video that I produce that comes out here the next day or two from the lead time battery, that I'm 24 volt one, it had exactly the same thing. When it shut down, it needed a trickle charge, and I confirmed that with a bench charger that would work, but I also confirmed that the Victron would reset it also, and I also know the 6000 XP would also enable it. So several different ones there, but your battery may just not be configured to come back on correctly, or it may require human intervention depending on what kind of charger and everything that you have. Let's go back to that. Josh in Louisiana says, can I reset my BMS manually when it locks up? My suspicion is if your BMS is locking up, that it's probably bad. I have never seen one that's locking up unless it's locking up because of low voltage or something like that, where it's, and I'm assuming you're talking about it freezing or that kind of locking up. So I would definitely consider just getting a new BMS, but can you disconnect it? Yes, you can, but you have to go inside and make sure that you disconnect the positive wire, which is usually a lead wire that runs to the BMS, that you're going to need to disconnect, which will completely remove power. I don't know that how many of them have memories and flash memory and stuff that it will remember where it was, but hopefully if it's locked up, that would do it. But that is a lot of effort to go to and not replace to replace it. If that was my case, I would just replace it. 23, does my Laura B asked, why does my solar controller say no battery even when it is connected? Chances are you probably have it set for closed loop, meaning that you're supposed to have communication cables connected to your from your inverter to your battery. Your batteries are supposed to be then connected to each other through this communication cable, and that would send over the state of charge. My 6000 XP has this problem, When I have it set on closed loop and I disconnect that communication battery, it assumes there's no battery there. Even though it registers the voltage and I have a full battery, I have to switch it to open loop, meaning set it to lead acid mode, and then it doesn't require the communication cables. In your case, if it was working and now it's not, my suspicion is you have a bad cable or a bad communication board in either a battery or in your inverter. But if the solar controller says no battery and you are running closed loop, then I would start with the cables and make sure that they're good. If the cables are good, then I would start with checking just to see if one battery would communicate or if there's a particular battery causing the problem. If you only have one battery, then I would try setting it to lead acid and see if you set it to lead acid, if it does work without the battery configured in closed loop mode. 24, Steve from North Carolina wants to know what's the best BMS for a 24 volt setup. And to be honest with you, I hate this question because I am very, very opinionated when it comes to BMSs because I haven't used a whole lot of them. Other than the ones that come in the batteries I've used the JK BMS. To be honest with you, I actually bought another BMS when I built my DIY battery, and I never made to actually installing it or using it. I ought to see if I can get some cells and put together another battery using that BMS and play with a separate one. The only ones I've ever used are the JK BMS. I like the way they work. I like the way they're configured. I like the way I can link them through, like an ESP32 device and wirelessly connect them to my home assistant, or I can connect them through the VE Connect into my Victron devices and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm a little partial to them. So it's really not an honest answer because I really just don't have enough exposure to any of the other BMSs to give you a true and honest answer. But my suggestion is go with the JK BMS because that's what I would use, and they work really well. Mel says, "Why does my voltage drop fast even with a full charge?" And my question would be: is your voltage drop? You mean you're living with the power drop off of a? Let's see if I've got that chart here still. I do. So that would probably be this drop here. When your battery is fully charged in lithium iron phosphate, it goes up to 3.6. But as soon as you start to use that battery, it is going to drop quickly down to 3.3, 3.2, and get to this point right here within this chart. And then it's going to hold steady there. So unless your battery is dropping below 3.2 or you have just a huge draw on the battery, you should see it level out pretty quickly and then maintain that for the next 80% or so of usage. Maintain close proximity to 3.3, 3.2, somewhere in that area. And really, it isn't going to drop much below that. Once you get down to 3.1, you're really starting on this downside over here on this one, and you're looking at the last 10%, whereas here you're going to see that drop in the first 10%. So I'm imagining that's probably all that you're seeing, is that drop is happening in that first 10%, and then it would maintain there. If I'm wrong, please send me another email and explain the scenario a little bit more and let me know exactly what you're seeing, and I'll be glad to go through it in a little bit more detail. All right, so Olivia R says, what is the safest way to connect two battery banks together? And we've really gone over this question, but because it's specifically asked, I'll go over it one more time, is to bring them to the same voltage. If the safest way for you to do that, because you not familiar with a meter, or not familiar with measuring the voltage of the batteries, is fully charge them all. They'll all be at the safe capacity at that point, and then you can turn them all on at the same time. Don't do this while there's a large load. Allow it to be fairly idle at the time that you do it. Turn them on. Make sure that you don't see any big flows between batteries or big pulls, which as long as they're all at the same voltage or at least all fully charged, you won't see any, and that would be the safest way to do it. And that's the short answer. There is a very much more elaborated answer at the beginning of the live stream. So if you missed that answer from the beginning of the live stream, I just suggest you go back and looking at it there. But that's basically the idea, is to get the voltages very close to each other, and then you should be able to turn them on without any flow of power between the two batteries, and that would make it very safe for you to turn them all on. Kevin in Nevada ask, why is one of my cells hitting 3.65? Why the others are still low? And this goes back to your state of charge not really matching what's going on. And this is kind of the whole topic of this live stream today. Your battery is out of balance. And because your battery is out of balance, that one cell is there. My guess is that you're trying to charge too high too fast. And the easiest way to work this is to basically start with a lower voltage and give the battery time to balance a little bit, and then you can specifically handle it from there. So let me kind of take you over to the whiteboard, and we'll discuss this one. Go through this one a little bit more. Why is one of my cells hitting 3.65? Why the others are still low? And I kind of go through a little bit of an explanation on the whiteboard. So the cells here. The cells here of 3.65, when you have that one cell that hits that voltage, the BMS is going to shut you down and not allow it to charge anymore. And this is going to prevent all of the other cells from catching up. And so this is why balancing a battery is extremely important, and giving it enough time before it gets to the voltage that it needs to. So most active and passive balancers activate when cells hit 3.4 volts. So what you need to do is set the charge voltage low enough that this cell never reaches 3.65, but yet the battery is still in a balancing mode. So 3.4 volts basically puts your charge, your battery voltage on a 56 volt on a 48 volt battery at 54.4. So you probably could set your charge voltage down at the 55.8 or 55, or even 56, instead of, if you're charging at 56.2 or 56.8 or 57 or even 58. You just lower that voltage to where it is the highest it can handle before the BMS cuts you off. If the BMS cuts you off, then what's going to happen is it's going to take it a while for it to drain enough out of this battery in order to start the charging of these three batteries. So what you want to do is you want to stop it before it gets there, giving the active balancer enough time to pull from the battery that's high and place in the battery that's low, giving the passive balancer enough time to burn off into heat some of the energy in this high voltage cell, and therefore allowing more voltage to flow in to the lower voltage cells. This is a real important aspect of state of charge being inaccurate, because you can easily get a group of 3 or 4 or 5 cells in a 16 cell battery that are up in the 3.6, 3.65 range, and then several that are down in the 3.3 range, and see a huge swing in the voltage of the battery. That would allow for because that huge swing in the voltage of the battery is there, then what's going to happen is you're going to shut that off, and it's not going to recover very quickly. And that is why you want to do it that way. Now, the original question was, why is one of my cells hitting 3.65 while the others are still low? And this would be directly related to your cells should all have the same amount of voltage, and they should all be the same voltage or as close to the same voltage. And so balancing is required once you get to be 10 millivolts or 20 millivolts out of balance. Now, if you're very lucky like me, you can get a battery bank that can handle 5 millivolt balances, but not everybody is going to be that lucky. Most of the time, 20 millivolts is a good setting for that. 10 is usually average, 20 is okay, and anything over that you really need to look at what is going on, make sure that your connectors in your battery are good, and that everything is really well there. Hopefully, that explains why and how you can correct it. Because if you can get that one cell down, and that will allow it to charge those other cells and bring them back up, and it will make your state of charge much more accurate. And there, this is it really is going to take them a few more years of building balancers where you can say things like charge to 58 volts, and the BMS is smart enough to know that I need to slow down as I start approaching, the 55 and 56 range in order to give those cells enough time to balance, and hopefully some AI to logic in there that would say, look, based on the rate that I'm charging and discharging, I'm going to, have 30 or 40 minutes of this kind of sun, and I need to do this or I need to do that. So hopefully that's where it's going, but it's just not there yet, and you have to kind of manage some of it yourself. Quick question, says Brad. Can I run my inverter directly off the BMS terminals? And the answer to that is really not a good idea. Can you? Yes, you can. But as I said earlier, you can also jump off of a building, and that's not a good idea either. Um, I would suggest no. Don't do this. You want to? Can they? It makes it very dangerous when you're going to have that dangling right there. There's 100 different reasons that I don't like this. The BMS should be mounted in a safe position and some terminals where you can get to it to where you can't move things around and accidentally bump it or doesn't and all that. It's a bad idea. Can it be done? Sure, it can be done, but it is a very, very dangerous and unwise to do so, and I wouldn't consider it at all. I'm not even going to go in any further to why. It's just a bad idea all the way around and unsafe as far as I'm concerned. How often should I rebalance a 4S LifePO pack? Uh, this is pretty much good advice for all batteries to balance. And I haven't actually looked at the statistics, but I know from the experience that I have with the solar shed uh, that that it had, not the solar shed, what am I talking about? The coffee trailer. So for those of you that don't know me, I also have a coffee trailer. My wife owns a coffee shop down on Cocoa Beach. It's directly across from Ron John's, and she serves the best coffee and has been nice enough to host us multiple times and stuff like that. But in her coffee trailer, one of my goals is to get to the point where the coffee trailer is 100% no gas burning energy power. Now, that's going to require a lot of batteries to run espresso machines, to run coffee pots, and we're talking about all inductive heating items and stuff like that. So it is a huge task, but it can be done. So I would like to do that. Now, immediately, what I wanted to do is a lot of um, we go to a lot of fairs, and one of the big problems that we run into when we go into the fairs, we go in, we park the trailer, and it's always a big relief to get set up and everything. But the problem is at the end of the night, you're thinking to yourself, you really don't want to pack everything up and take everything out and come back the next day and set it all back up. So it's a lot easier just to close all the doors and lock everything. And most fairs provide security for your vehicles and stuff, but you can't just leave a generator overnight running and stuff like that. So what I installed is, and what the video coming out here the next day for the 24-hour lead time battery is a solar coffee trailer solar system that basically allows me to keep all of the freezers and refrigerators and soda machines and stuff running when off grid. So if I'm at a fair and I have power, but it's only run, only their generators only run a certain time of night, that I can use it when it's on and then use the batteries to run it other than that. We went to a fair, gosh, I guess it was last year. Uh, and while we were at the fair, one of the problems that we ran into is that the power would shut down at about 11 o'clock at night. Thus the reason that I put the solar into the trailer, because I didn't want to park and unpark every single day. So I put the solar into the trailer for that exact purpose of balancing it. Uh, but it balances every day based on the Victron device that's in it. My batteries in my RV, as long as I have full power, they balance every opportunity that they get. So how often should you balance them? I would say a minimum of once a month, I would balance all my batteries. Is it an absolute necessity? No. I went 3 months just recently without connecting any grid or doing anything based on the extra power the solar shed had provided me and based on adding the new 15.6 kilowatt DIY solar battery. So I went for 3 months where I never hit 100 and I never hit zero until just this month where the heat really took over and I just don't want to conserve energy. And I just basically turn on the hot water heater, use power from it. I haven't had an electric bill in over a year. So that's kind of relatively good. Marcus in Michigan says, my battery monitor says 100%, but I still lose power. Why? Your battery monitor says 100% and I still lose power. Why? Marcus, I'm not sure I understand. If your battery monitor says 100, it stays 100 and runs for no period of time, or it stays and shuts off immediately after you turn off charging, or it just runs for a very short, limited amount of time. I'm probably going to need a little bit more information on this one, Marcus, and I don't know where the question came from. I don't remember if it was email or if it was one of the messages off of one of the YouTube posts, but I will go back and hunt down and make sure that we revisit this one and get you a solid answer. My suspicion is if it's cutting off immediately, that you've got some kind of bad connection with your BMS cable, your closed loop cable. Try switching it to lead acid and see if just using voltage would work. It eliminates it. Sometimes those communications between batteries and between the inverter and stuff can interfere with it. My 6000 XP has the same thing. I had a bad cable once and it just shut off and just turned off on me. Fortunately, I didn't have the grid hooked up as a backup, because it would have just ran on grid. I would have never even known it had a problem. So my suspicion, it's very odd that it still says 100. And the question is does it ever change from 100? Maybe it's getting a bad reading from somewhere, and maybe the battery isn't 100 and you just think it is. Or maybe maybe there's something else. I think we're going to need more information before I can really dive into this. LEJ asks, what is the deal with the closed loop versus open loop BMSs? Do I need one? This is a very good question, and I'm going to need a drink before I continue. So open loop and closed loop communications. Ellie, if you haven't watched the video that I had come out on this earlier this week, actually I believe it was Tuesdays, I do a short live stream, which is basically, I call it Tuesdays Tips, and I talk about different subjects. An abbreviated version of my live stream, like this one, where it usually goes for a long period of time. That one I usually try to limit it to 30 or 45 minutes, and I have a very focused conversation about it. This week's was open loop and closed loop communications, where I went through a lot of closed open loop communication questions, and I'm not sure how this one made it here as opposed to there. But let me answer the question nonetheless. For years and years and years, we went open loop. Open loop was basically based on battery state of charge. The state of charge was based on lead acid batteries, and we basically used the voltage of the battery to determine what the state of charge was, and it worked just fine. Recently, where energy efficiencies and technology with BMSs and state of charge calculations with lithium iron phosphate became more complicated and they couldn't use the battery's voltage, the manufacturers started building into the BMSs to protect these types of batteries. The BMS, and with the BMS came the built-in shunt for that, which therefore gave us the state of charge. And then they decided that it was important that that was used to communicate with the inverter on what is going on with the battery, how much of a charge can it take. If you've got 3 batteries running and they're all allowed to take in a maximum charge, then it could tell the inverter, send me all the power you've got up to the amount that my batteries can support. If you got one of them that says, hey, look, I've had enough, then it can also tell the inverter, hey, slow down a little bit. You're already 2/3 of the way there. You don't need to push so hard. And now, that doesn't change the fact that batteries are absorbing what energy is made available. But what you also don't want is you don't want an excessive amount of over generated power trying to flow into these batteries and cause them damage, or push on the ones that there is a limit to the amount that the battery BMS can stop, and that those diodes and things can cut off and stop from flowing in the wrong direction. So there still is a reason to stop that type of availability, even though technically the BMS has cut it off. But you don't want to damage it by pushing that much voltage on it if you don't have to. So that is why. So the closed loop basically means that the battery is the batteries are all connected and they're talking directly to the inverter, and they're controlling the inverter of how they want to be charged, how much voltage they can take, how much charge is left, when they're full, when they're empty. They can kick off automatically based on this state of charge, when to start a generator, when not to start a generator. So there's a lot of advantages to this, especially if you have off-grid generators and you're living off-grid and you want to kick on and automatically kick on this or that. And so that would be the closed loop. The open loop is what we've been using for ages and ages. Most of this technology isn't anything new. Do you need one? Well, the determining factor is how automatic is the system that you have, and how much are you relying on that state of charge to do things. I use open loop and I use the smart shunt from Victron for my state of charge. I could feed that into my inverter and control it with that, or I could hook it to my EG4 batteries and use that. The problem is when I added the DIY battery, that kind of put into the mix the whole problem. Now, technically, I could still run the inverter off a closed loop with that, and I could use just add the DIY to the bank, and it would charge along with it, and the power would still be shared with it, and the inverter would just respond to what the EG4's request. I chose to go open loop because I like the way the solar assistant, which I could show you, I like the way the solar assistant. Let's see if I can switch this here. I like the way the solar assistant reports the battery charges and stuff to me, and allows me to report to my home assistant and control automatic devices based on battery charging. So here I get each of the battery packs with my, now a lot of the more current EG4 batteries provide this information directly from the inverter into Solar Assistant. The LifePO4 batteries, V1 batteries that I have don't. So I like the way it reports the high cell, the low cell, and as you can see how close to balance they all are. It tells you here what the battery flow is, the wattage in and out, if they are balanced, and it also talks about the state of health, which we talked about earlier. So I like having all this detail. When it was coming through the inverter, all I got was this summary information that's like you see at the top of the page. Total watts in and out, battery voltage in and out, amperage in and out, and the total pack size of 298 amps, and the temperature that was basically estimated, and I'm not even sure which battery it was giving me the temperature for. I'm assuming it's the master battery um, in the pack. The state of charge overall is 52%, which is basically the average of these three batteries down here. And the state of health is 99%, meaning that after all of the cycles that I've had, 219, 224, and 210, only 1% of the battery capacity has been lost. I like seeing this stuff in my solar assistant and having access to it. And I don't really feel that my inverter gives me a whole lot of benefits of having the closed loop. So when I switched over to my DIY battery in an attempt to understand how it all worked, I switched, and to be honest with you, I like it better. I still have in my home assistant, I still have the main state of charge that comes through from my batteries is my Victron. So I have my Victron, I have my JK BMS state of charge here. I also have my Lux Power, which is the one coming from the inverter, which comes through the solar system, which is using these three batteries. So they all report to the same thing. But it allows me to chart things like what are the different batteries and what's the mins and the maxes and stuff like that that I can't get from the inverter. So I'm a statistics guy. I love playing with the statistics. I love playing with the automation and figuring out all the different trinkets and toys. If I was looking for a if I was looking for a system where I basically just turnkey, turn it on and forget about it and didn't really play with it and tinker with it and weren't creating all kinds of videos for people online, then yeah, I might use a closed loop system. For me, I like having the details. I like seeing them. And to be honest with you, getting the messages automated from Home Assistant on my phone is much more friendly and useful for me than it is to have the inverter respond to something that some way I may or I may not like it. I put the bare necessities in the inverter. And it also allows me to do some of these configurations from the solar assistant also, so I don't actually necessarily have to get into the inverter. I can come here and set my minimum charge, start at 48.5 to use the grid if I need it, and cut off at 54. I could, if I was running in state of charge mode, then it would be start at 12. But the EG4, the 6000 XP and the EG4 batteries don't allow you to set this below 10%. So I can't actually run my batteries down to zero, which basically means I bought 10% of a battery that I'm never going to use, which for me, that just is ridiculous. If I've got 100% of battery, I want to use 100% of battery, especially when the calculations we're doing are showing these things are going to live for 20 or 30 years. Why wouldn't I want 10% extra battery for the next 20 years or 30 years? So that's kind of my opinion on the situation and why I would go that way. So do you need closed loop? No, you don't need it. We did it without closed loop for years. Is it kind of cool in certain circumstances? Yeah. If I was installing a inverter in my grandmother's house and was going to tell her, don't worry about it, it'll take care of everything, then yes, I would hook it up with the state of charge and have it completely automated where nobody had to mess with it and I could monitor it remotely without hooking anything else up. But for me, I like closed loop. So you're going to have to decide where you fall in that length. I think that eventually, state of charge, the technology will get better, the measurement methods will get better, the science behind it will get better, and we will get to the point where you won't. When BMSs came out, they were frowned upon also, and they were been adopted because the technology got it well enough that now they do more good than harm. State of charge and open and closed loop are not got there yet. But I believe they will get there over the next few years, where then state of charge, using the state of charge from the batteries will become the norm at some point. I don't think we're there yet, but we probably will get there. In your EVs, the state of charge is something that you rely on drastically. Is it 100% accurate? How many of you would panic driving home when your EV is reporting a 2% battery charge? I know if it was me, I would. So that's kind of where we stand with that. Number 32, Dana from Arizona says, my solar charge controller never leaves float mode. Is this normal? No, it's probably not normal. It probably means that you have something misconfigured in your system, and probably your, depending on the type of system that you've got. Let me start with that. Let's assume, for example, it's a Victron system. In the Victron system, you would have multiple configurations of being able to turn on what the bulk voltage is. You would have a float voltage, and you would have an absorption time, meaning that you would charge it to this voltage, you would leave it at that voltage, giving the balancers enough time to adjust it for fixing whatever variances they have in it, and then it would drop down to the float, meaning keep the battery at 100% and just provide enough power to keep everything else running and not pull from the battery until such time that you don't have enough solar to support it. So my guess is that you've got the charge voltage set too low, and it immediately drops to the float voltage, which not in all cases would have to be set lower. It could be set exactly the same. So maybe you've got them both set at 54 volts or something like that, and it just never goes into actual volt mode. I would mess with the configuration. If it's an inverter, check the configuration in the inverter. If it's a shunt, if it's not a shunt, if it's the charge controller from Victron, you definitely want to get into the configuration settings and look at it there. But no, it is not normal. It should go into bulk mode when your battery has been discharged some, and then once it reaches a full charge, it should go into an absorption mode, which is supported and not supported by every device, but it is in Victron. It isn't in like an EG4 or something. It would then drop to float mode. So the we are looking at coming up here on we've got about 5 or 10 more minutes, and then I'm going to call it quits. So if you have any questions, get them, and regardless of how many questions I have left, I'm just going to leave the rest of them for another week. I know it's been a long live stream, and I appreciate all of you being here. But at some point, I do have to end the live stream, and I don't want to, but it's going to happen. So we'll get on to the last couple of questions here. And if you have any from any of you on live want to ask the question, now would be the time so that I can sure to get those in before I go. Question number 33 is, not sure if this is a dumb question, writes Nick. Can I use battery without a BMS? And I don't know if I covered this before. It sounds familiar, but yes, no, you cannot use a battery without a BMS unless it's not a lithium iron phosphate. I would not connect lithium iron phosphate without a BMS. Can you? Sure. Yes, you can. But it's a bad idea. The BMS is there to protect the battery, to protect your investment, to protect bad things from happening. Always. You should always have a BMS when you have a lithium iron phosphate battery. And my recommendation is no, do not do it. Always have a BMS unless you're running lead acid batteries. And then that's a whole different world that runs on an open loop. And it's completely different. And I stick with the lithium iron phosphate. So you can do, like car batteries and stuff like that. But it's not a dumb question, but it's not a good idea. Don't do it. Number 34 is Haley L asked, why does my battery voltage drop 2 volts when I flip on the inverter? It's actually a really good question. The whole idea of a battery is it's measuring the current voltage. And as soon as you put a draw on it, you're going to have a couple of different things that could cause the voltage to drop. First of all, if you were fully charged and sitting at 56.2 and it was just sitting there and you put a charge on it, immediately you're going to go back to, as we discussed before, and I will show you the chart again if I can find it. Immediately you're going to go back to this chart here where you're going to have that immediate drop, that first 4 or 5%. you're going to see a huge drop in your voltage. Two volts, 56 down to 54 is completely and totally reasonable that it would happen relatively soon. I don't know if you mean it's instantaneous. If it's instantaneous, there's also a very good likelihood that not all of your connections are perfect. What you want to do is check the voltage at different places. In other words, take the normal. This is one thing that I did this last week with a system that I set up, and you would be surprised how good of a debugging tool this is. But you want to take the negative part of your um, meter, and you want to connect it to the negative post of the battery, and then touch as many positive pieces that you can. In other words, the other side of the battery, and whatever voltage you have there, go further and further away from the battery in your connections. And when you start seeing voltage drop, that could mean that you don't have a good connection at that between those two joints. So you want to check all of them. And then do exactly the opposite. Start with the positive side of the battery and check all your negative joints all the way up. These things can add up and show you real signs without a fancy equipment or thermal test. You can find real signs of battery voltage drop. This problem of it showing that huge drop when you first turn things on is very common when you have a bad connection somewhere. I'm not saying that is it. It could be as simple as the voltage drop here at the beginning. It could be as simple as that you have a bad connection. It could be a variety of things, but those are going to be your two most common problems that you're going to have. Rob in Georgia says, can I connect two different brands of LifePO batteries in parallel? This is a perfect question to end this live stream on. And I am going to say the short answer and the long answer, and then I'm going to explain a couple of things. Let's start off with the manufacturer's suggested way of doing it. They would say no. What they're going to tell you is that if you're going to connect batteries in serial, or if you're going to connect batteries in parallel, that all of the batteries need to be of the same brand, of the same size, bought at the same time, from the same people, at the same blah, 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 blah. I hate to say it, battery manufacturers, get over it yourself. I think that is total crap, and I think that it is a method to CYA because you don't want to go into explaining to us dumb people what the requirements of the batteries actually are. And here's where the real problem comes in. Most of these batteries are not set up to support larger setups than the ones that they're suggesting. For example, if you take 12-volt batteries and you connect them in series and you create a 48-volt battery, there is a certain amount of throughput those batteries can support. And what they're basically essentially saying is that their batteries can support 4 in parallel. They can't guarantee anyone else, or in series, I'm sorry. And then most of them will say that you can only connect 4 in parallel or some number in parallel for a maximum number of X number of batteries. And what they're saying there is that their battery safety for transferring power back and forth, as we were talking about earlier, when you turn on additional batteries in your battery pack, the way to fix that is to make sure they're all of the same voltage. They're worried about batteries transferring power and not being able to support that power. So the short answer is the manufacturer is going to do a CYA and they're going to tell you, no, you can't do it. I believe, it is my opinion, I am not an electrician. I do not tell you that you should do this, but I am emphatically telling you that I think that is crap. I think, yes, you can do this, but you have to do it with caution. You need to make sure that the batteries that you are connecting in series can support the power of that series battery. You need to make sure that each of the packs that you're creating, and when I mean a pack, you've got 12-volt batteries and they create a 48-volt pack. They need to be properly fused to protect against the other batteries infusing too much power or causing too much of a battery draw. Okay? So that would be the way you'd protect it there, is with a circuit breaker of some kind that prevents that type of damage from being done, so that you don't have to worry about your BMSs shutting off on 4 batteries in parallel all at one time and causing damage. So as long as you connect them correctly with the proper fusing, the proper breakers, and the proper battery sizes, and this is the other part of this that's really important, they need to all be the same kind of battery. Don't go mixing lithium iron phosphate, lithium, or lead acids all together. Don't go mixing 15 cell batteries with 16 cell 48 volt batteries. They need to all be consistent batteries. In other words, they need to all be either lithium iron phosphate, 16 cell, nominal voltage 51.2 volts, or they need to all be 15 cell lithium iron phosphate batteries. So as long as you follow all those rules, yes, you can safely do it, but you have to do the homework and make sure that you have the right setup. Otherwise, the battery manufacturer is going to take the position, and rightfully so, look, I can't speak to everyone else. I can't speak to all the other manufacturers. I can't speak to the wires, the connectors, and all the stuff that you're putting on all these other batteries. So the answer is no, don't do it. It's the same answer that we're getting from them, that with 80% depth of discharge, your battery will last longer. I still don't see evidence of that either. So that is a very opinionated view from me to you about how I feel about it. I am not suggesting that you do any of it. I'm suggesting I will do it. And you can watch, and if you want to do it yourself, that's on you. And I hope you stay safe. I hope you listen to the good advice. And I hope that if you're not comfortable with anything that I said, you call an electrician. That's what they're here for. That's what they do. They make sure that we stay safe from power, because that's what it's all about. I really want to thank all of my subscribers. Again, I want to set off a little bit of fun that we've had with meeting and hitting 7,000 subscribers during the live stream this week. I don't think we'll make 8,000 by next week, but I hope you prove me wrong. Thank you for coming. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you haven't already subscribed or liked, please do it now, because the live stream is ending. Thank you so much, Matt. Matt will bite the bullet. Otherwise, hire an electrician. You got it right. And on that one, Al, thank you. And thanks to all of you. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you on Tuesday for Tuesday's tips, and next week for Sunday's solar, what do I call it? Sunday's solar talk? I don't remember. Whatever. I'll come up with a good subject. Write the emails. Keep sending the message. I want to keep responding to you. I want to keep going on it. Thank you so much. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you next week.